What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the CompileSwift podcast. I've got a special guest with me this week. Some of you, I'm sure many of you developers will know the name because he has a wonderful Slack that we all hang out on. It's a super secret place in the middle of the ocean somewhere. But I've got Joe Fabisevich with me this week, and hopefully I didn't get the name too badly wrong. I tried, folks. I tried real hard. He has an application which you may have seen. You may well have seen in the AppStore because it was featured. He's that much of a superstar. And so, Joe, please introduce yourself.
That is a big promise. Superstar is a lot to say, but I do have an app in the App Store. So the app is called Plinky. Myself, I've been an iOS developer for almost or probably 15 years. I started working somewhere around iOS 3, so we're at iOS 18. I guess that's about the right time. Over the years, I worked at a lot of startups, some names that you may recognize like Bitly and TimeHop. And the last place I worked before going indie was at Twitter, back when that existed. I helped start and at times led our societal health team. We basically focused on improving the civic integrity of the platform. And that's a big way of saying we built and designed features that were trying to minimize misinformation, disinformation, abuse, harassment, something that current management doesn't seem to care too much about. But yeah, now I do something very, very different. It's building personal, playful productivity apps as an indie developer at my little one-person shop, Red Panda Club.
Fantastic. Well, so first of all, let me just say thank you for all the good things you did at Twitter and that. Greatly appreciate that. We certainly need more folks like yourself out there looking out for what I call the people's interests, right? And also, thank you for Bitly. I don't use it so much now, but I was a huge Bitly fan for a long time. Yeah, let's dive into this. So we're going to go through some history here and some of the things you've learned along the way. But for those who don't know, and shame on them if they don't know, we will put lots of link in the show notes, right? But tell folks what Plinky is and what it does. One of those origin stories. Why, how did you come to be like, I need this app?
Yeah, so while we're talking about links, Plinky is an app that makes it really easy to save a link. Plinky has share extensions on the iPhone, the iPad, so you can save from any app. It has browser extensions for Chrome, Safari, and Firefox. It has a little menu bar app that I made called Plinky Mini. And it even has an open API so that you can save links from anywhere with just one tap or one click. When you're ready to come back to your links, they're all there in Plinky, complete with, the organizational tools you would expect, like folders and tags, search, pinning, a whole bunch of stuff, more coming soon. And yeah, there are plenty of apps on the App Store that let you save links, but I built Plinky in this very extensible manner, and I think that it really shines in three ways. One, it's really quick, and I personally think delightful, and have been told so, to save a link to Plinky. And the reason it is because I save links dozens of times a day, and all that time that I am saving links adds up. So I made speed a priority in Plinky. I wanted to save your links and get back to what you were doing quickly. And not only is it fast to save a link, but it's fast to just get in and out of Plinky. I don't want to spend all my time there. The next thing is that Plinky is incredibly customizable. After years of trying out every single link saving product on the App Store, I never found one that just felt right for me. And so I've gone to great lengths to make every aspect of Plinky customizable. That way it becomes your home for links. And adding on to the customizability is extensibility. There are really great read it later apps out there, but they're not particularly good for, saving a cute animal video or a funny post on Threads that you want to share to your partner. And there are other apps that are great for long-term archiving. They're really complex, made for creatives, but they're not very flexible. You can't use one of them as a to-do list for your links. And so I focused on making Plinky an app that works for all kinds of links, all kinds of workflows, and all kinds of people who want to save links for later. So at the core of it, it's really just an app that helps you save links, whether those are articles, recipes, TikToks, and whatever strikes your fancy. If it's got a URL, Plinky can handle it. And, much like most apps ideas on the App Store, it stemmed from my own needs. I mentioned before that I'm a huge read it later user. I tried Pocket, I tried Instapaper. All of them are great products, and I like them a lot. The use case for me with Plinky, though, wasn't saving articles. It kind of emerged in 2021, just as we were exiting that COVID haze. And I met my then girlfriend, now wife, Colleen, and shortly after we met, she discovered just how much I love links. I'm grateful that she did too when we first started dating. I asked if it wasn't too distracting to send her links during the day because I knew she would be busy with work. And she said, "Oh, yeah, that'll be fine." And then while she loved that I was thinking of her and sharing interesting articles and things we could cook together or hikes we can go on or cute animal photos, it really did get distracting for her to have her phone buzzing all day. So yeah, she suggested that I save the links for later. And, as a person who's tried every app, I said, this will be easy. That way we could look at them together at night. And I started filling up the Notes app with links, but then I quickly found it to be just a disorganized mess. I couldn't actually tell one link from another. Yeah. So then I tried leaving dozens of browser tabs open because I'm a tab hoarder. But then I would lose them and forget about them. And then when Colleen came over, I wouldn't be able to find them. So they just kept piling up on my computer. And then I tried adding links as to-dos in Things, which is my reminders app. Mm-hmm. And then I could not use Things because I had a jumble of links that I wanted to show Colleen. And so none of these systems worked. And one morning I remember distinctly waking up and going, I have an idea for an app. And she was like, what is it? And I said, it's a small thing. It's just a place for the links. We have this problem. Uh-huh. So I built a prototype in a couple of weeks, and then we started to use it all the time. Then actually what happened was I started to show people like this little app that I made for the two of us. They just loved the idea that I made an app for the two of us. When they saw the app, they were like, wait, actually, I could use this. Like, I'm unhappy with one way of saving links or another. And they kept telling me that they wanted an app like this for themselves. And a few months later, that's when I left my job at Twitter and I had long decided, it's like basically a career-long dream of mine to be an indie developer. But I decided that the thing I wanted to build was Plinky. It was something that had come along a decent amount in the probably 4 or 5 months that I've been working on it on nights and weekends. And, it took a long time because 2022 I left. And today, though, it's a real thing. Plinky is an app. It's on the AppStore. But for the two of us, it's more than an app, really. It's a tool that we use every day, but we also have our own rituals around it. Mm-hmm. So sometimes Colleen saves a cute video for me of a black cat, since we have a little black cat. And sometimes I save a hike we can take or something that we can make or a place we can go. And then every night, the two of us come together. We share links that we save for each other the same way that we've been doing for two or so years, since before it was even on the App Store, before it was a dream of mine to be working on it full time.
Fantastic. So I'm going to break it down a little bit here because you've hit on, firstly, you've nailed all of the things that I do badly. And I'll break that down in a second. But you've simplified it to great. You've given us that one place. I'll give you some examples here. You see these things and you're like, oh, got to share this with someone, or I'll read it later. I'm not going to read it now. That's me, right? For me, mm-hmm. Everything is always, I'll read it later, right? Yeah. But the problem that I always have, I don't know if it's just me or this is developers in general. I hope it's not just me because that'll make me super paranoid. But I have lots of apps and lots of places to put all these things. And then later on, you're like, oh, shoot, where did I put that? And I have mm-hmm. tried to solve this over the years, like you mentioned, Notes, numerous apps, right? All these kind of things. Bookmarks in browsers, and then you're using mm-hmm. a different browser and it's not there, and all of that kind of stuff, including those services that are sort of one of those just gather them all in one place, but it's still a bookmark. And if you don't give it a something meaningful, you're sitting there thinking, mm-hmm. what was that thing about? Or eventually, as I'm guilty of, especially with the Safari store it, read it later, is I just forget about them completely. Yeah. And what it reminds me of, the only solution I ever found that mostly worked. Do you remember? I don't even know if it's still around anymore. There was an app called Yojimbo. And you remember that one? And that was the only one where it was like, okay, great. At least I've got a spot to put everything. But it was very much put it in there. That was it, right? Mm-hmm. And so some of the key areas in your app, I think is kind of, we use that Apple phrase, a delightful experience, right? Mm-hmm. Is, like you said, it's very simple, very straightforward, very quick and easy to use. I also love that you have, like you say, you've got some tags and all the organization in there. But one of the things that stands out to me is you've taken some of the pain out of it for me, because and folks, go get the app. Just trust me, download it, take a look at it.
Please.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please. Because you'll sit and watch the little bottom bar with all the tags and that as they scroll past. You have all of these suggestions. That's the other thing for me is I overcomplicate my life, right? I'm like, oh, what's a good tag for this? And then next time you're like, oh, what's a good tag for this? And you end up with similar tags, but not the same, right? And so I love the idea that you're suggesting these tags, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just go with that one because it's a podcast link. It's a whatever it may be, a movie, a book. And you've taken the pain out of like, we'll just tap one of those, right? Use it how you want to use it, right? So talk about that.
Yeah, so you touched on quite a few things. I took a few notes. And I think there's one thing that I've never thought of, but really came to mind as you were saying, there are so many things that you want to do with an app. I have built Plinky ideally not every tool in your arsenal at once, but it's a tool for everybody. And so that customizability and extensibility means that what I want it to be is for a person who wants a read it later app, it's a read it later app. For a person who wants an archiving app, it's an archiving app. I built it really just for people who are like my mom, not people who have 30,000 links saved. I will get there in terms of being able to support all those use cases, but I consider it almost like a Swiss Army knife for links. So I really thought long and hard about this. I even read quite a few books on knowledge management. So the science between folders and tags and search and archiving and all this stuff. And I thought I had some sort of like genius system where everything was a tag. And then as regular people started to use it, I realized I was making a complete mistake and I just should depend on these tools. And people always ask, when do I use a folder versus a tag? And my answer is, it's really up to you. Like, what works for you? I've over time started to give folders and tags their own meaning, I would say. So folders are where you put something and tags are more like annotations, but the system remains flexible enough that if someone comes in and says, yeah, I'm a tag person, I really want to use tags, that's fine. And in fact, in a future version, I'll even let you customize the tab bar at the bottom to say, you never use folders, remove it. Like, I don't care. I want this to be truly your home for links. That design that I started with was very similar to what's there today, but I'll actually take a step back and talk about how the name came to be. Originally, the project was called Plinky because I just needed some sort of name to name the Xcode project. And then one day I was at Colleen's place and I realized, I'm like, oh, I can make this really neat animation. And I'm sure you've seen it once Plinky launches. There's this little animation where it goes, it says PLINK and the little Y jumps into the tab bar. And if you have your sound on, it actually makes a little plink sound. And I just went, oh my God, Plinky. I should name this Plinky. And then once that happened, it's like a light bulb went off in my head. And I said, everything needs to be fun. Everything needs to be interactive. It needs to be simple and straightforward that someone who uses, standard Apple apps can figure out. It's a list of links.
Yeah.
But everything needs to be something you can touch and feel and play with.
And I'm glad you explained how we got the name, because that was one of my things was when I first saw the app, I'm like, okay, I get the link part. And I'm thinking, Plinky, is it, when you're like, is it because it sounds cute because it is cute? And then I'm like, but how did you come up with Plinky? So now you've explained it. So thank you. That's like, check that one off the list, right?
Well, I think that for me, I'm like a very textual person who has a lot of history, doing a lot of writing and things like that. And so when words, they have a space in my brain that's also connected to like the visual part and the feel of something. And so it took me a long time to get to Linky, but almost always whenever I open up an Xcode project, I'm like, oh yeah, like I had an idea for an app and great. Like I have this idea. I'm not going to spill the whole app idea, but it's an app that makes it easier to interact with databases. And I was like, oh, it should be called Database. It was just obvious. And I was like, well, now I can open the Xcode project.
Oh, I'm glad you could do that. There must be a clinic out there I can go to that's going to fix me of this, right? It's like
you just have to read 50 books.
There you go. Because I'm thinking like, I should not be spending this much time on this thing. It's one thing if you're like, okay, I get that I went through 50 designs for the icon. That's important. Yeah. But when it's like, I can even change this name on the home screen of device X, right? It doesn't, and I'm like, it's just a project name. Just, when you're sort of talking to yourself and you're like, Peter, just get over it. Put in anything,
There are a few words I say more than I say the word Plinky these days, so it's a pretty important thing for me to name.
Do you now find yourself going around like just plink, 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 plinky,
That's the verb, actually. When you save a link, it's called plinking.
I was going to say, I love this, that in my head, I'm like, oh, plink, it's gone.
That's right.
It just so works, right? And now I want to touch on the sharing part, right? Because, this is another thing where a lot of apps are designed for like the me thing, right? It's like, save it for me, right? And then maybe I share it, but I got to leave the app to share it and all those kind of things. And even Apple now, with Notes and all their built-in apps are starting to more embrace this, like the idea of the shared calendar. And it's like, why doesn't everything have a shared photo album and a shared this and everything else? And I love the idea of the shared links, because I wanted to touch on this. This is the other thing that gets me, and I've not tried it yet with Plinky, so we'll see. You see something on, because we'll go down these rabbit holes, like you said, like cat photos, right? Yeah. Who doesn't do that, And so you're going through and you see like these cute things on Instagram or whatever it is. And then you're like, yes, got to remember to show someone that later on. And then you go back, and because of algorithms, it's like, nope, gone, never going to see it again, And so this idea of, great, if I just put it in this shared thing, I don't even have to tell people about it at that point. So, I think the sharing is an important aspect. I'm curious, and you don't have to give away all the details. Do you use Apple's technologies on the back end for that? Whatever it may be, Core Data, CloudKit, those kind of things? Or did you sort of go with a homegrown, made your own approach?
Yeah, I actually built it on my own stack. So I do use Vapor on the server. And
great.
Yeah, the app architecture is based on an open source project I built. It's called Boutique. Boutique is it's a library that basically gives you full offline storage in your app, no matter what app, in only 3 lines of code. And it's got a couple, I know at least 100 or so apps are using it out there. It's very neat because it just uses property wrappers. So instead of writing @state, you write @stored. And then when you update your database, or when you update the data, it saves it to memory. So it updates the value, and all those values propagate out through your app. But it also saves it to a storage engine, which most people use the SQLite storage engine. And that means that when you launch your app, all the data is already there. And so it's much simpler than Core Data, and it's much more extensible in a lot of ways. But the most important thing is, when you build a Core Data app, you're building a Core Data app. Like even with Swift Data, you have this, all these property wrappers, or specifically ways that you have to re-architect your app, even if it's just a little bit. And when you're using Boutique, you actually are writing the same code that you would have written if your state was local. And so this was, funny enough, the second commit to Plinky was this giant library, because I took a 4-month diversion and built it and open sourced it. It was actually like a month or two, and then people loved it. And so I spent another month or two basically productionizing it in a way that it can handle hundreds of thousands of objects. And there's still things I want to do, and I plan to do probably in about 2 or 3 months, to bring it kind of into the observable world. But it's honestly the best infrastructure investment I've ever made. And so I'm not going to say Core Data is bad. I just don't have a preference for it. But it's a very crucial part of what makes Plinky work.
Very interesting. Yeah. So this, gonna have to check this out, and definitely send me the links. We'll put in the show notes for folks.
Absolutely.
I'll have to play with this, because this sounds intriguing. So this just basically ties in with again, I could spin up my own Vapor backend and tie it in there. Is it fair to call it remote syncing still? You've got this local cache, or it's purely local?
It's purely local, but what's interesting is the storage engine itself is an actor. So
Okay.
you can use either an actor or a distributed actor to build this kind of architecture. And I know someone who has actually, one person built a mesh network on top of Boutique by building their own storage engine, because the storage engine protocol is simple. It's just define read, write, get all keys, and a few other methods that basically shape the structure, but they're all async, which means your async structure could be getting you a response in milliseconds because it's happening with the database, or it could be seconds if you are connecting it to a server. So
Sure.
it's all possible, but out the box, I ship SQLite and file system just as proof of concept for file system to say, this is how you could build your own if you want. And the truth is that for 99.9% of people, SQLite will get them 100% of the way. And so there's no need for them to ever look anywhere else. The Vapor portion for me is I wanted to have my own database, not because CloudKit is bad, but because there are features that I want to build that will involve collaboration. So, for example, you mentioned sharing, right? Sharing to the app is a feature that obviously is the whole point of the app at the moment. The next version of Plinky is going to focus on iOS 18, so app intents and widgets and all that really cool stuff that Apple announced. Then I will be building a full Mac app. The current Mac app is the iPad app, runs on Mac. It runs well, but I really want like a native Mac app. And then the feature that I'm going to invest in after that is the idea of having shared folders. So you and a partner, or you and a group of friends, or you and whoever can have one folder where I drop a link in and you see it immediately. So that way, if you want to, if there's some reason for collaboration, if there's some reason that you have where it's like it's important for you and someone to have links together, whether it's a workplace, whether it's a relationship, that will be available to you. So it takes sharing into Plinky and turns it into a thing where you can share with the people in your life, similar to what you mentioned about notes and reminders and Apple embracing all of that.
Cool. Oh, that's going to be very awesome. Yeah. And, I love the idea that it's breaking free from, like you say, I've never had too many problems with core data. I know I've now kiss of death right there. So I'm actually building an app for myself at the moment. And it was my excuse to say, all right, we're going to do this from the ground up with Swift data, which really, to all of us, is like, it's just core data made pretty or prettier.
Yes.
You know that you are, I don't want to say locked into a system, but you know the constraints going in. If there's any major shift in core data or Swift data, anything like that, you have to move with them, right? Especially for breaking things. And so anytime you can, come up with your own system that says, they're my constraints. If I get it wrong, it's on me. If I want to do something else, that's on me too. And yes, like you mentioned, there's the upfront time of building it.
Yeah.
But at least that you are, you're taking it down the path you want it to be, as opposed to saying, okay, I've got to do certain things this way. I'm enjoying the Swift data. I will say that, it's working out, but I'm not pushing the limits on it by any stretch.
It's definitely a double-edged sword, because if I want something to exist in Boutique, I have to build it, right?
Yes.
And if I'm saying I want to focus on Plinky, then it means I'm not working on Boutique. I might be when it's in service of Plinky, but that's Plinky product time I'm not working on. And it's a real consideration when I think about, it currently needs to add observable support. There's a branch that adds it, but I need to go clean it up and make it documented, and I need it to be something that can be open source, and then I have to do breaking changes and make sure that I support it properly. But on the other hand, if I want something, then I can build it. And that's a real advantage. That said, it's great when Apple gives you something for free, right? iOS 18 comes out and Swift Data has this new feature, and sure, you might not be able to use it for a year or two for whatever reason, but it's great. Like, I love getting stuff for free. So it's really about the trade-offs that you want. In my case, I'm not recommending that people spend 4 months of their life building a database.
Oh, everybody should do it once. Come on.
I will admit, I learned a ton in the process, and I learned a ton about databases. For example, Boutique V1 shipped with that file system storage engine, and pretty quickly I hit limits. Like after around 10,000 objects, it takes about 0.25 seconds to load all the data in the database. And I was like, why is that? These objects are small. And, when you get to 40,000 objects, it's one whole second. And that's when you start to notice real lag. I said, why is this happening? And I realized every time you read a file, there's a file system lock and unlock for resources. And it's actually really slow. I would have never learned any of that if I hadn't done this project. And then I said, gosh, what alternatives are there? And I looked into SQLite, and there's this blog post called SQLite is 35% faster than the file system. And it goes really, it's like a really long post. It goes really in depth into why, but the short answer is you don't have to lock and unlock the file system. So SQLite is way faster. And so Boutique does this hack where I could take your object and convert it into SQL-like compatible data and figure out how I should structure each table based on the data that you're trying to persist. But instead, I just use SQLite as a key value store the way that I would files. And it's really fast. And I don't have to deal with any of the, how do I construct the right table? I was able to build it in one night instead of weeks upon weeks of work. And so even coming up with that hack was a lesson that I learned, actually anything you want to do in technology is pretty much doable. And you just have to really learn about what you're doing, and then you can figure out interesting solutions.
Yeah, you're right. You have to definitely pick and choose, when you should roll your own or just say, I should use this other one because it exists and it solved the problem, and, go with that. I do. All right, here it is. The one thing that I cannot do without every day, and that is my coffee. Anyone that knows me or anyone that's listened to any of my podcasts or anything else knows that I absolutely cannot operate without my coffee, and I love good coffee. So here's the deal. I'm going to give you one free bag of coffee by going to peterwitham.com/coffee. There is a wonderful company out there that follows the fair trade practices, helps out a lot of independent roasters of all sizes, and the operation is simple. What you do is you're going to go to peterwitham.com/coffee. You sign up there. You get a free bag of coffee sent to you. Yes, in return, they say thank you to me by giving me some coffee. But that's not the reason I'm doing this. The reason I'm doing this is because I have found so many good coffees that I just would never have come across, heard about, or experienced without this service. Trade Coffee is just fantastic. There are plenty of places out there. We all know them that supply coffee, good coffee. You can go to the store, get the coffee, but there is nothing better than discovering new independent roasters and supporting them, discovering new flavors of coffee, new grinds you can set it up. It's very smart. You tell it the kind of coffee you like, and over time it gets better and better as it trains in on your selections and your choices and gives you exactly the coffee you're looking for and recommending new ones that will be very similar. Every time I get a new packet of coffee, I go through, and afterwards I try the coffee. I go through the service and I say, look, I loved this coffee. I thought this coffee was okay. Or I say, look, this was really not for me. And every time I do that, it makes the service a little more accurate on the next selection for me. So again, just go to peterwitham.com/coffee. Get your free bag of coffee today. If you're a coffee lover, you're going to really appreciate this service. I have been using it for years at this point and thoroughly recommend it. I want to touch on, I want to hear the story behind this and how it made you feel when you discovered that you were featured in the App Store. Talk about that, because, that's something I think, and I've spoken about this on the podcast before, with folks. It's something everybody dreams of. Did you just sort of wake up one day and you're like, oh, there it is?
When I was starting 2024, before Plinky was in the App Store, I create like a yearly theme. What do I want to do this year? And just like kind of directional ideas, North Stars. And I didn't expect to achieve all them, and I haven't. The first one was get Plinky featured on some sort of well-known trade publication. It could be TechCrunch, it could be Mac Stories, it could be 9 to 5 Mac, Daring Fireball, all those things that people read. More in the space are probably something like Lifehacker, any of them. I would just be happy. I launched in May, so at the beginning of 2024, still 5 months before launch, I just wrote, have Plinky be featured on one of these sites, and I would be over the moon. And then the other one I wrote was have Plinky be featured on the App Store. And that one, I was still for 15 years, and I've worked on some great apps that have gotten featured, but it's never been my own. It's never been like something that I was 100% responsible for. I can take credit for this. Like Simone Biles wins gold at the Olympics. She did it, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I just honestly had this belief. Like I said, come hell or high water, I'm going to make this happen. And of course, I'm a very like Bayesian type person. I'm like, well, you can do the things that get you closer to the thing that will happen, but you can't guarantee results. But in my heart, I was just like, I'm going to make it happen. I don't know how, but it's going to happen. And, you know, the thing that I did was take all the steps that needed to make it happen. And we can touch on that in a little bit. But yeah, I think getting featured, especially so soon after launching, was just really validating. It felt so special because I've been giving back to the community. I've been doing all these things in the belief that good service is what you're supposed to do. Building good products is what you're supposed to do. And it's just lessons that I've learned since I was a kid. It's not transactional. It's not you do good things and expect good things in return. It's you do good things and occasionally good things happen to you. And that's what makes them so sweet. So the thing is, like, Plinky's been out for 2.5 almost 3 months, but I look at Plinky and I see all of its flaws. Like, I get really excited when I use Plinky and I go, oh, this feels so good. But then I think about all the features I'm going to build. And I think, wow, like still such a long road. And I'm invested in this. I'm an indie developer who's spending my time building this. And so I know it's a long road. Yet here is Apple saying, we're willing to put your app on our most important surfaces. Yeah. And that's just special. Like the metaphor I would use is it's probably a lot like what getting into Harvard feels like. There's this rush of excitement there. It feels special. But also, a lot of amazing apps don't get featured, right?
Yeah,
In fact, it's the great majority of apps. So to be an app that gets featured does feel really meaningful. But at the same time, you know, I earnestly believe that not getting featured doesn't mean your app isn't good. The same way that I went to a state school, and just because it was an Ivy League, I don't feel like I'm a dumber person for not having gone to Harvard or Yale or wherever. I think, you know, watching the news or watching the world, we can see plenty of dumbasses who went to Harvard. So it's not a guarantee by any means.
I think, I love what I'm hearing because for me, when I first thought about transitioning to, okay, I'm going to do mobile full time, right? Mm-hmm. I have a day job, I work for a company, working on their apps, but there was still that conscious shift of mobile feels like the thing I want to do. Mm-hmm. It happened to coincide with the Swift in 2014. Mm-hmm. You know, I was a web developer and Flash developer and all that stuff. So, you know, when Swift came along, I realized this is my avenue. But what I realized quickly, and what I think the reason that I think it's so great to work on this stuff is the App Store is a great leveler, right? Just like you can publish anything to the web or anybody can publish, same with the App Store. And I think it comes down to a lot of that belief of, like you say, you have to believe in what you're doing, right? You know, and yes, we all have those days of like, oh my gosh, am I doing the right thing? Is this really going to work out? I think, like you mentioned, sometimes something inside you says, I'm onto something here, right? Yeah. The fact that I'm still working on this. You know, personally, I couldn't think of a better validation other than your customers saying to you, great job. Right? Yeah. Is to be recognized by the peers of the very system you're using when they say, great job. And especially early on, like you say, milestones, you've got a roadmap and everything else. But to get it so quickly is great justification for saying every second I spent on it, every painful decision I made was worth it, right?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I don't think I could put that into better words. I will say that love getting emails from customers or even just Plinky users who haven't become customers yet. I realized in the time that I was working on this, I just missed that connection between the software I was making. I had a couple hundred people on the beta, and anytime anyone told me something, I was like, this is great, like a person telling me something. But when I first started hearing from people who were like in Greece or Bulgaria, and I'm like, I don't know anyone in Bulgaria. Someone found this on the App Store and really cares enough to reach out to me. And I put 100% into my customer support. I'm writing every word. I care a lot about creating a connection over email, even if it's, I think on one level, like it's a form of sales, right? It's a person who emailed. I've had people email with like, I love this, but blah, 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 blah is broken. And I will email them like, with genuine apology, like, hey, I'm working on this. I explain why it's not working, and then I go into depth. I make sure that I really bring them along for the journey. And then the emails I get back are like, oh my God, not only did I not expect a person to respond, I didn't expect this level of care and thoughtfulness. And as we kind of touched on with the app itself, I generally live my life as if I put care and thought into everything I do. And I will admit that it takes a lot of effort. It's occasionally exhausting and I find myself burnt out, but I wouldn't do it any other way. And so honestly, yeah, like the emotions I felt when I got featured, and we can talk about what that actual moment was like, but it's a bit like kind of how it's hard to describe falling in love. You could describe it as two people really like want to share their emotions and spend their life together, and they want to commit to building a better existence for each other, and that they feel all these feelings and all these words that if you've ever been in love, none of the words can ever do it justice, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm not saying it was the same as meeting my wife. And in fact, if she's listening, I promise it wasn't. But actually, no, I want to be very direct and honest. My wife is a product marketer, and so she helped me tremendously in this process. And I credit her with a big chunk of why I was featured. Like the software I can write myself, the design I can do myself, putting up the website. But you can lead a horse to water. And in this case, I was absolutely the horse, who needed to be led to water. And so without her, I'm confident that it wouldn't have gotten featured. So my number one piece of advice I tell people is marry a product marketer. But if you can't do that, I will at some point, probably in the next month or two, have a blog post that tries to take this, share it with people, so that way more amazing apps can get featured.
Great. And we will definitely share that with folks when it comes out, because, that is one of the areas that I often say to folks is like, look, you can learn all the technical things, right? All the very black and white programming type things, right? Yeah. Very binary. And then, and this happens in our Discord, shout out to the Discord folks. And, then you get to that part of, now it's the business side. Now it's the marketing, the publicity, and, all those things. Is like, okay, I know I've got a great product. How do I tell the world I've got a great product? That to me is way more stressful than any amount of development, because for me, the development side is very much you make this decision, you go with this. It's wrong, you change it.
It's also enjoyable.
Exactly.
That's why you do what you do.
Exactly. That's always kind of like, that's my safe zone, right?
Same. Same here.
Yeah. And then, when it comes to the other side of it, it's like, I think I got it right, but it's always great if you've got someone else who knows this stuff and they can say, maybe tweak this a little bit, or leave this with me. I'll fix this up for you, because it can be stressful, right? And then, the reason I was saying about like the App Store was, I've spoken to some folks in the past and they're like, oh, and it was a huge success in the App Store. And then the following day, something went down and they were freaking out, and they're like, oh my God, it totally killed their system, because they never expected this kind of volume or for this to happen, right? You dream and you're like, oh, that'd be great. And then the next thing you know, you get the bandwidth bill come in and you're like, oh my gosh. Hearing folks get excited about their stuff when it goes up in the App Store, they get featured, or like in my case, I always set myself small goals, because everything I do outside of the day job it's just a side thing, right? And there's only so many hours you can put to that. So I set myself small, achievable goals so that I hopefully don't get too disheartened when it's like, oh, it's just not going right. And so I celebrate those little wins. And that's what, when folks ask me about this stuff, and I don't know if you get this, but I get this quite often. They're like, how do I get into this? I want to do this. How do I do this? And it's like, okay, understand that you should set yourself small goals. It may be nothing in the big picture, but it should mean everything to you when you do it, right? Because you're not whoever it may be, and you're going to get 1 billion downloads and $1 million a year and things like that, right? If that's your goal from the outset, good luck with that, But if your goal is more like, I want to sell one copy of something, and then you achieve that is way more rewarding than selling the millionth copy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but if I sold the millionth copy, I'd be a lot richer. So I don't know
Is true.
which one's
There
much more rewarding.
Yeah.
No,
well, I'll tell you what, but yeah, no, I know what you mean. It's like, get the 1 copy, right? Get the 10, set 100, work your way up to the million. Don't ever not want the million.
There's this book I remember picking up. I remember picking up a book early in a...
Hey folks, if you like what you're hearing in this podcast and you want to help this podcast to continue going forward and having great guests and great conversations, I invite you to become a Patreon supporter. You can go to patreon.com/CompileSwift, where you will get ad-free versions of the podcast along with other content.
In my programming career, and it was called Learn C++ in 21 Days. And I was very intrigued by the title. Like, it's only 21 days to learn C++. And I think the first sentence goes, welcome to the first day of your 10-year journey. And I was like, that checks out. Yeah. And I often feel like if we knew the things that we know now, we never would have started doing the things that we do. But that's why motivation has to be intrinsic. It can't be extrinsic. You can't be motivated by, I'm going to sell 1 million copies of this. You have to be motivated by, I want this thing to exist.
Yeah.
You can be motivated by extrinsic to some extent. That's like how we get people who work in finance. But, people would have mixed feelings about that. And so I think that a lot of the mentorship sessions that I do, I find a lot of people get stopped on one thing that they're not familiar with. For example, the marketing, or even something as simple as AppStore Connect. And if I can spend 5 minutes unblocking them in that regard, it actually unlocks a whole world of possibility. Now, all of a sudden, they were just looking for an answer. They were just looking for a solution. They just want to move on with and do the thing that they want. I remember this one time someone came to me and they were working on this app that was very all-encompassing around different like Islamic traditions. And I don't know much about that. So I asked him, about it, and I tried to understand what he was building. And he was talking about how it was going to take like a year to ship, maybe months if he was lucky. I said, well, like, how much of this matters and how much of it matters equally? And he was like, well, this is the most important thing. And I was like, okay, the thing that's most important looks like it's almost done. He goes, yeah, it's almost done, but I got to have all these other things. I said, why? Like, that's what version 1.1, that's what version 2.0, that's what version 3.0 is for. And, he just hadn't even considered that. He sees all these apps on the App Store that are all so great. He never considered that those apps weren't great on day one. And so reframed that way. He came back to me like 2 weeks later and he goes, Joe, I have an app on the App Store. I'm so excited. I never would have done this without you. And so even me as a person who, doesn't have a context about Islamic rituals and traditions, looking at through a software lens or looking at through the lens of like a potential user, was able to just go, actually, what really matters here? And these are the lessons I apply to Plinky. I try and apply them to my life. It's like, what's core, what's essential, what matters, do that. And of course, just like any human being, I'm constantly distracted by the buzzing of all the things that aren't essential but feel essential. But it's basically the daily challenge of getting up and saying, here's the entire world, and then actually sitting down and going, here's the 1, 2, 3 things that actually matter, getting them done, and then moving on to the next 2 or 3 things that matter. And that's why I look at my app and I go, ugh, this is garbage. And then I get an email from someone who goes, I love your app. It's amazing. Yeah. I've never thought of anything like this. I never thought I could enjoy saving links. And I'm like, right. That's what you're doing this for.
And, it's funny you mentioned that, because I'm curious if this happens to you. I think there must be some huge force in the universe at play here, because almost every time that I get to that point where I'm like, why am I bothering to do this? This is ridiculous. I should give up, or I can't solve this problem, or should I even care about this? The next day I get one of those emails, and it's like somebody heard this and was like, okay, I'm going to tell you why you're going to do it. It always goes that pattern, right? So I don't know if that happens to you, but you always get that burst of kind of like the pat on the back just when you need it the most.
I think you may want to look into Buddhism, because it sounds like you just described karma. No.
Yes. You're quite right. Yeah.
I actually am a big believer in I'm sure that this actually happens to more people, but they don't necessarily open their eyes to it because they're narrowed in on something. They're narrowed in on that emotion where they're closed. It may be anger, it may be frustration, it may be sadness. They have this whole wide spectrum that they could be looking at, which is evident by the fact that sometimes you get something in life that changes the way that you look at everything, but it was there the whole time. You just had to open yourself up to it.
Yeah.
And so I do really think that there's that phrase, you are the luck that you make, or the hard work that you do is, creates the luck that you make. I think to some extent, getting an email like that is all the hard work that you put into the thing before. And so it's not a coincidence. It's just timing and luck. But the fact that you did all the work is what set you up for that opportunity.
Yes. Yeah. Two things that I always stick with me, and I remind myself when I'm having those kind of days, weeks, is firstly when I got my first couple of podcast reviews, and one of them was along the lines of, "Hey, I've been through a whole bunch of podcasts, and this is the first one that ever explained something in a way that it made sense." And it was like, that's exactly the goal I was going for, right?
Yeah.
Explain things to people, hoping that you get the maximum kind of audience from different levels of understanding. And in fact, for everything that I do, especially when I'm mentoring people and things like that, I like to help those just starting out, because that is often the hardest one, right? You don't want to be reading bunches of technical manuals. You need the easy win of do this thing, it worked. Later on, we'll explain why. That, right?
Yeah.
Because you've now got them to the point where it's like now they want to do that next thing later on, as opposed to giving up. And the other one was a friend of mine. Shout out. I don't know if he listens to the podcast. I should ask him. This guy NZ, if you're out there listening, buddy, how you doing? He happened to come across one of my live streams, and I'm going to embarrass him now. He's making a game. It's fantastic. But
embarrass away.
Yeah, I'm totally going to embarrass him. And he said, hey, if it wasn't for me finding you making your game on the live stream, I would never have done this. And here he is months and months later doing phenomenal work. A great believer, like you say, with the mentoring. If you can just help one person, maybe they'll help the next one. All right, so we've covered a lot in this episode. We could talk about this for hours. You're welcome back anytime, my friend. But Joe, thank you so much for talking with us today. Please tell everybody where they can find you. Most importantly, tell them where they can find Plinky. We will put lots of links in the show notes, but go ahead and tell folks where they can find you and anything else you want to mention.
Thank you so much for having me. It was actually a real pleasure. It's funny that on the Compile Swift podcast, I feel like the only thing we didn't really do is talk about Swift. The place you can find me, I'm on Threads. That's mostly where I hang out these days. It's mergesort, MERGESORT. And I also have a Mastodon account, but you can follow the Threads one from Mastodon. It's all very confusing in the meantime until Threads properly federates, but that's mostly where I hang out. I have a blog. I'll link to it. It's fabisevich.ch. I'm also writing about basically these lessons, like how can you bring your app to market and how can you build interesting features in certain ways. I have a blog dedicated to that called build.ms. The MS stands for mergesort. Then you can find Plinky. That's the most important thing I work on. Plinky.app, PLINKY.app. And yeah, you can find it on Threads in the same way. And the AppStore, please download the app. I don't know, this pandering, begging, whatever you want to say. But the most important thing is I genuinely think you'll like it. If you have a need for it in your life, I think you'll enjoy it.
I do too. And I'm not just saying that, if you've ever had to, try and remember a link or put a link somewhere, which is, let's face it, everybody on the internet, this is going to work for you. It is so straightforward to use. Even I know how to use it, right? So that's how much you got it right. But yeah, we'll put links in the show notes, folks. Folks, you know where to find me. Go to compileswift.com or peterwitham.com. Or Compile Swift on all the networks. Again, links in the show notes. Go try Plinky. I think you will be very happy, and send Joe a message and say how great it is, right?
Please do. And if I can steal your outro, I say you leave the Compile Swift podcast a 5-star review, and then head over to the App Store and leave Plinky a 5-star review, for symmetry.
There you go. Do both of those things, and the universe will treat you right, is what we're telling you, right? But if you only do one of them, do Plinky, right? And then we'll put a link in Plinky for the other one. There you go.
You know what? That's very gracious of you, and I've never been one to turn down help. So let's go with that.
There you go. Yes. Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much, my friend.